Wonderful. I'm Dr. Maria Karafilis. I'm the director of the American Communities Program and a professor in the Department of English at California State University, Los Angeles. And I want to welcome all of you for joining our webinar and the event that we have today that we are super excited to present for you. And our panel today is Contestable Times, which is a conversation on the nature of time from the perspectives of physics, philosophy, and religious studies. And this is an event from our theme for this past year and the coming year on time and temporality. And the American Communities Program is an initiative jointly funded by Cal State Los Angeles and the National Endowment for the Humanities. And it's Cal State LA's Public Humanities Center. And we are dedicated to increasing the vitality and visibility of humanities-based inquiry on our campus and its surrounding communities, and the exploration and analysis of the formation of individual and communal identities. And I invite you all, if you haven't already, to like the American Communities Program on Facebook, and that way you will find out about all of our events and public programming, and also additional information on happenings, mostly in Los Angeles, that align with our mission. So again, I welcome you all in the audience, and also a very warm welcome to our panelists today. And now I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Pablo Baler.
Thank you, Maria, and thank you everybody for attending this virtual event, Contestable Times. Again, my name is Pablo Baler. I'm a professor of Latin American literature here at Cal State LA and the director of the Center for Contemporary Poetry and Poetics. And I want to thank you, Maria, for putting this together with me. And a shout out to David Pitt, the chair of the Department of Philosophy, to Choit Chatterjee, she's the chair of the Department of Education and Religious Studies, and Radhi Jishi, chair of the Department of Physics, all of them co-sponsoring this event. And also a shout out to my friend Iris Chu, who helped us as well. Our theme, so as Maria said, this year is time and temporality, and this roundtable is one of a series of events attempting to address this particular theme. People have found it somehow funny that we thought of bringing together a theoretical physicist, a philosopher, and a Buddhist teacher to talk about time. But it's really not such a whimsical selection. There's a reason why we didn't choose to put together a dental technician, a beekeeper, and a flamenco dancer to talk about time. Each one and all of these guests have deeply and meticulously considered the problem of time as what it is, one of the most fundamental abstractions underpinning our experience as human beings. In the most ordinary sense, everybody has an idea of what time is. It's this abstract fluid through which we move through from our past into our future. So every approach that defies this somehow commonsensical understanding would seem puzzling in a certain and in a certain sense unnecessary. Interestingly enough, though, those who have thought harder about this issue seem to have somehow converged on some type of refutation of time as a category of existing phenomena. It is indeed a confounding question, and that's the question about which Saint Augustine, going back to your paper, John, thought about, and this is the one to which he famously wrote, "If no one asks me, I know what it is. If I have to explain it, I do not know." In any case, Augustine believed that time is a concept that exists only in the mind, and that it is connected to human perception and experience, which might not be too far off the mark from the perspectives we will hear today. In fact, when I first, the idea of putting together this event with Julian Barbour, a famous proponent of time as pure illusion, he agreed, but he asked me, can we have the meeting before 2 p.m.? So there are clearly several dimensions to time, and hopefully we'll get to some of them today. I will post the bios of the panelists on the chat if you want to take a look at them, but let me briefly introduce them in the order they will speak. John McCumber is a professor at UCLA's Department of Germanic Languages. Among other books, he is the author of Metaphysics and Oppression, Heidegger's Challenge to Western Philosophy, and Reshaping Reason Towards a New Philosophy. Julian Barbour is a theoretical physicist with research interests in quantum gravity and the history of science. He received his PhD on the foundations of Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity at the University of Cologne in 1968. He is responsible for the radical notion of time capsules, which explain how the powerful impression of the passage of time can arise in a timeless universe. Venerable Thubten Chodron is a pioneering American Buddhist teacher and founder of Sravasti Abbey, as well as co-author with His Holiness the Dalai Lama on the Library of Wisdom and Compassion book series. So we could say that today we are blessed by the guardianship of Einstein, Heidegger, and the Dalai Lama watching over us. That's not too bad. Each one of our panelists will give a short presentation about their respective takes on time, and then we'll open it up for discussion and Q&A. So feel free to leave your questions. We'll eventually try to get to them. So again, thank you all for being here, and in particular to our guests, our panelists. And we'll start, of course, I don't know why I say of course, with the philosopher, John McCumber. You go ahead, John.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for being here, or wherever you all are. I want to begin with the passage from Augustine that Pablo has already quoted, because I think it's not just a statement about time. I think it kind of, or a puzzle about time. I think it's kind of gets to the core of certain aspects of our experience of time. Time is experience, temporality, it's usually called temporality. So Augustine's remark, in a little bit more extent, goes like this. But what in speaking do we refer to more familiarly and knowingly than time? And certainly we understand when we speak of it. We understand also when we hear it spoken of by another. What then is time? If no one asks of me, I know. If I wish to explain it to him who asks, I know not. So it's an interpersonal context that he's working from. And but I think it's not merely an expression of personal confusion. I think it shows us what time is. Time is that which baffles us only when we are asked about it. Otherwise, we understand it. So what is it to be asked a question? A question is usually understood in the active tense, preference for acting in the Western tradition. When it's used, when question is used as a verb, it means to ask. I question this. I question that. I want to ask a question from the other side. What is it to be asked a question? I don't know why the preference for action. Platonic dialogue, the Socratic method, is often viewed as a method of asking questions. I think it's a method of being asked questions. I think that's what happens, except in Domino. And I want to ask, how does being asked a question fit into our experience of time, temporality? The first thing to say is that when you're asked a question, you get interrupted. Whatever you were doing, you have to stop and answer the question. Questions come as surprises, especially if they're posed by another person, but also if they're posed by me. And that's the case with Augustine's remark. So in a question, when I'm asked a question, my immediate past, whatever I've been occupied with up to that moment, is put out of place. But not the past of the questioner. The person who asks the question, nobody asks the question inadvertently, right? You blurt out various things, but you don't blurt out questions. So someone who asks a question has a purpose in asking it. She's seeking something. It's part of a quest, her questioning. So the posing of a question is not for the person who poses it an interruption. It's only that for the person who was asked. For the person who poses the question grows out of some ongoing concern that she has, something from her immediate past. So you have, when a question is asked, you have two different pasts that are in play. My past which affects the interaction by actually being put out of play. I have to break with it and attend to the question. And the past of the questioner, which determines her question is very much in play. So if I answer the question, I'm choosing to join her past and not my past as governing my behavior. So the past is chosen. Past in play at the moment is chosen from an array of possible pasts. Now, when I'm asked this question, as Augustine points out, I don't know the answer. I never know the answer, I think, because the question is interrupting what I'm up with. I haven't been paying attention to it. So when I first asked it, it's a moment of bafflement, a moment of confusion. Augustine's account is an extension of this more ordinary kind. The confusion for him will not go away because the answer to the question stubbornly will not come. So in such cases, the immediate future, which is the answer to the question, is unknown. This unknowability of the future doesn't just occur in this context of being asked a question. David Hume pointed it out first, when he talked about the scandal of induction, the idea that no matter how many times something has happened in the past, we have no warrant whatsoever to believe it will happen in the future, which means that the future is unknown, really unknown. It may be so much unlike the past that it contains nothing that we now know of. You can't exclude that. It may not even contain events or things. So the temporality of being asked is already placing into question two common Western conceptions of time. That time is a flow, which being itself empty will just keep flowing forever. And time as a succession of events, which persists into the future and never stops. Being asked about time brings me then before, oh, sorry, I got the wrong page. So how do we know that either of these is true to our experience of time? I have to back up. Is there, to begin with, such a thing as an eventless future? Being asked a question poses the possibility of a future without events. Does that even make sense? I think it makes sense. And I think we see that by coming not to science, but to religion, and in particular to Kierkegaard's appropriation of his Christian heritage. Our future for him is nothing less than our temporal opening onto eternity. And for him, on his take of Christianity, we are moving towards eternity across the events of our various lives. When we die, we will enter eternity. Kierkegaard establishes the connection between eternity and the future on the basis of their common inconceivability. He writes in The Concept of Dread, the eternal first signifies the future, because the future is the incognito, in which the eternal, even though it is incommensurable with time, nevertheless preserves its association with it. So they're both unknowable, and that's their common feature. If we subtract from Kierkegaard's account of time what is specifically Christian to it, which is the whole part about either going to go to heaven or to hell, no other options, no changes subsequently, because changes would be events, we're left with just the view that the future is, as Hume thought, totally unknowable. But in contrast to Hume, whose interest in the future in his treatise is primarily theoretical, the future for Kierkegaard is something to which we are ineluctably underway. It's just a nanosecond away, but it's completely unknown. And so it's of great practical moral significance. And this significance shows itself, first of all, I suggest, as bafflement in the face of an unknown future. When we talk about the future, we pretend to know it. And to do this, we have to see the future as containing the sorts of things we can talk about. Events, objects. When we are asked about time or about anything, as Augustine points out, this pretense falls away and we are just left unable to say anything. We are left before an empty future. So this does not occur as Kierkegaardian fear and trembling before the alternative of heaven and hell. it occurs as Augustinian anxiety about whether we're going to be able to answer a question. Being asked about time or about anything else also brings me before a past which is not an order of events. For when I'm asked a question, I experience not one, but two orders of events, my past and the past of the questioner. Already pointed out they're different. If these two orders of events were the same, the question would not be an interruption to me, right? It would just build on my current experience, as it does for the person who asks it. So different pasts go with different people, leading them to do and undergo different things in the present. And everyone has what I call a personal past. The question then arises of whether these personal pasts are experienced as components of a single larger series containing all past events. If so, then there is such a thing as the past. If not, there's just a bunch of personal pasts. But this question is easily associated with the Leibniz-Newton controversy over the metaphysical substantiality of time. Is time a single thing unrolling on its own, substantial, as Newton thought, or is it merely relational, what Leibniz called the successive order of things? So things come first and then their order is time. A personal past would be one of many successive orders of things, or as we may say, events. A single larger order would place us in the vicinity of Newton. But we're not speaking metaphysically here, but of time as we experience it. And here even Newton agrees. We commonly experience time relationally, and indeed as a plurality of past. So to quote from the arch text of this session, Newton's mathematical principles, absolute true and mathematical time of itself and from its own nature flows equably without regard to anything external. And by another name, it is called duration. Relative, apparent, and common time is some sensible and external, whether accurate or unequable, measure of duration by means of motion, which is commonly used instead of true time. So science, for Newton, diverges from experience in order to explain experience. For Newton, relative, apparent, and common time, just because it's apparent and common, is what we usually experience. And indeed, as Kant observed, it's impossible for us to experience time as a single order of events, because we cannot experience all events. And so absolute true of mathematical time, Newtonian time, is what Kant would call a thing in itself. In the realm of experience, in other words, everybody's a relationist. What we experience as the past is some particular succession of things or events, beginning in the past and presumably ending in the present. That's what I call a personal past. The common past is something that is produced by communication among ourselves when we blend our personal pasts into a single understanding of the present situation. As when I'm asked a question, and my past, it's not blended, it's put outside, but I assume a common past with the person who asked me the question. Mm-hmm. The conventional future, so outside of this kind of thing, the past doesn't empirically exist. We can't experience all possible events, so it's not an empirical concept, as Tom would say. The conventional future, conceived as an abstract ordering of all possible future events, is also a conceptual construct. But not only can we not experience all of them, we can't experience any of them because we can't experience the future. So not all, just to sum up here, not all questions need to be answered. The baffling nature of time derives from the fact that our primordial experience of the future is of something intrinsically unknowable, while our experience of the past is really of a blending of personal pasts, and so depends on whatever encounters we have happened to have with other people. So you can't generalize about it. To answer Augustine's question, what is time, would require suppressing two facts about our experience of time. facts which are highlighted in his account of being asked. Number one, that the future is intrinsically unknowable. And number two, that the past is originally personal and so unstable and malleable. So how does this relate to scientific accounts of time? Well, I don't know them very well, so I'll wait to learn about them. But there's a kind of a paradox. If we are empiricists, what scientific, logical, and metaphysical theories of time have to explain is our experience of it. If the view of time as an event series falsifies that experience, then it can't explain it. It's explaining something else. So theories based on that view may be explaining something, but they're not explaining our experience of time. The considerations in the previous paragraph suggest that we should reverse the order of explanation. The account of temporality, which I've just given, which is different from normal accounts, can explain how theories of time arise, namely through our efforts to convert time as we experience it, or temporality, into something we can talk about, into a series of events and properties of time. Then we get the conventional view of the nature of time, which then physics has to identify perhaps as an illusion, but in so doing explain. If we don't suppress these facts, then our attitude towards time and the thing in it changes. If the future is intrinsically unknown, we're not going to attempt to predict it, as Marx so faithfully did, or to bring about some desired version of it. We're going to relax, we're going to await it, and the surprises it will bring in an attitude that could be called open expectation. Something will happen, we don't know what, and so we attentively enjoy what is happening now. We don't try to leap beyond it to some better future. And we accept the openness of our past. The fact that part of having a personal past is blending it with those of other people we encounter, and that in this blending, what we consider our past to be is going to change. So the scientific account remains as what Kant would call an idea of reason. It's what we get when we push the future and the past to their utmost limits, make them into enduring and remaining things, which we can talk about as if they were out there in reality. This means detemporalizing. It means looking at the ordinary experience as an illusion and viewing time itself as something permanent, enduring, eternal. So time as we experience it, I want to conclude, is not a flow, it's not an ordering of events. In both its past and future aspects, it remains a mystery. The best we can do is understand, if only slightly, why it is a mystery. Okay, so that's one philosopher's take.
Hello, sir. You want me to come in now, Pablo? I can't hear you.
I say, please, Julian, do. Yeah.
Yes, okay. Well, I will do my best to explain how I understand time. I would like to think it's compatible more or less with both Newton and Einstein's theories of relativity. There will be some overlapping with what John McCumber has said, particularly with regard to what Leibniz thought about relationalism. Now, I personally have a very concrete notion of time, or rather of instants of time. I believe that instants of time exist, but not time itself. And I'll try and explain that in the simplest possible way I can, which is to imagine the simplest possible universe that's non-trivial and could be in any sense like what we experience. And that would be just a particle which consists of 3 mass points in Euclidean space. And these mass points, they would be at any instant at the vertices of a triangle, like the one I'm showing you here, one here, and one there. And then that would be one instant of time. And then another instant of time in this simplest possible non-trivial universe would be represented by a different triangle, the three particles would still be there, but they would form a different triangle. And you could imagine then as we look around the world, we see shapes, they seem to change. You see my hands moving and changing. So the simplest model that's non-trivial that I can conceive of the universe is just those three particles that are changing their relative positions. And they can then be described, it could be that they can be governed by Newton's law of gravitation. Now, what is really objective in that? What is objective in that model of the universe that I've had is just the successive triangles where the particles are placed at the vertices. Those are, and in fact, because there can't really be a ruler outside the universe, it's really only the shapes of those triangles that count. So the simplest model of the history of the universe that I can conceive just consists of a succession of triangle shapes that vary. Now, if they are described by Newton's laws, they will then tell me that there's a certain amount, Newton's laws, if they evolve in accordance with Newton's laws, those laws will tell me that there's a certain amount of time between the two triangles. So there's nothing actually there. The only thing that is really there is the triangles, which with the particles at their vertices, and they're changing their shape, the triangles are changing their shape. And it's as if the whole history of the universe was just these successive shapes of triangles, which you could put down in a heap and then rearrange them as they were in accordance with Newton's laws. And the space, you can imagine there's a space between those triangles. That space, that horizontal space, is the interval of time according to Newton's theory, but it's not really there. All that is there are the particles that are changing the shape that they form and the laws that govern them. So I would say that time, as Newton conceived it, emerges out of his laws and the things that really are in the world. So I think that's the way I would like to think about time. I think it matches to some extent what John McCumber was saying about Leibniz thinking in terms of relational terms. I personally think that Leibniz and after him Ernst Mach were closer to the truth than Newton. And I think that's really enough for me to say, because I've got across the key idea that I want to get across, which is that instants of time exist, but time itself does not.
Okay, my turn?
Yes, I think so. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, I'm going to take this in a totally different direction. In Buddhism, time is huge. We have beginningless time, we have endless time, okay? And time itself is not a thing, okay? When we talk about how we classify phenomena, phenomena is anything that exists. There's two classifications: things that are impermanent, which means that they are in constant flux, never staying the same, and things that are permanent, meaning that they're static, they never themselves change. So it's not eternal and non-eternal. It's based on change or not change, okay? And among the phenomena that change, we talk about three kinds of phenomena, okay? So one is form, material things. Yes, they change, we can see that. The second is consciousnesses, minds, and so minds, yes, are impermanent, they're changing in every split second. And the third one is called abstract composites. And these are things that are not form, they are not consciousness, but they are impermanent phenomena. So time falls here. So time, to know time, you have to see something else. In other words, time is something that's designated in dependence on change of other objects. Okay, so it's you have to see the other objects and then how they change, and then that's how you measure time. But time is not a thing, you know. Because so often, you know, as human beings, we want everything to be a thing, some kind of objective external entity that we can define and put in a box and know exactly what it is, because that makes us feel secure. Yeah, and I think a lot in our lives, what we're looking for is security in this very insecure, constantly changing life that we live. Okay, but time is something that's continually changing. We can't stop it. We can't pin it down. And like I said, it's dependent on other phenomena and are measuring the change in those other phenomena. So in Buddhism, why do we think about time? What's the purpose of thinking about it? What's the purpose of measuring it? Okay, there's a practical time. We managed to meet at 2 o'clock. But more than that, the question of time asks us, what is the purpose of our life? What are we doing here on this planet? And why? How did we get here? What's our purpose? You know? And these are very fundamental questions that I think everybody has in their hearts. For many people, these questions are deeply buried. They don't come out. Sometimes when you're a teenager, early 20s, they come out. But when you get really busy with your life and creating a family, having a career, your social networks, everything like this, these kinds of questions just fall by the wayside because we're trying to put out all the fires, so to speak, of everything that we're called to pay attention to. But I think what's really important is that we take the time to really think about, you know, the past, the present, and the future. Not in terms of what they are as external concrete entities, because from a Buddhist perspective, we say that nothing is an external concrete entity. Such things don't exist. That things are existent in relationship to our conceiving and designating them, not out there as some external thing that we just happen to bump into or experience. And so, you know, to really think, how did we get here? And what's the purpose? Because we're all going to die, that's for sure. And how do we want to die? I was really struck, John, when I read your paper about Kierkegaard's fear of eternity and how paralyzed he was by time, you know, sin and going to hell for eternity, unknown future, you know, eternity. And he was so freaked out by that. And like I said, in Buddhism, you know, time's beginningless, time's endless. If you're going to, you know, don't get freaked out about that because there's nothing you can do about it. That's the way things are, you know, the nature of impermanent phenomena is they change. So it's not a thing of trying to slow time down, concretize it, control it. Our life is a product of seeing how we can use time, use our time to do something good in the world. Okay. And so again, from a Buddhist viewpoint, you know, what good is there to do in the world? It revolves around caring for others and helping others. Okay, so two things basically. One is opening our hearts, learning to forgive people, learning to overcome our attachment, our anger, our apathy towards other people, and learning to really open our hearts and see that everybody wants happiness equally. Everybody wants to avoid suffering equally. So what's so important about me? Why should I just work for my own benefit if we're all the same? So that's one area that we put a lot of time and energy in. The other area is, what is the nature of reality? And here is where we come to this thing of negating the possibility of objective reality that is the same for every single person, okay? Which is how we usually see things in life. It's all out there. Everybody sees it the same way, which is my way. And when they have different opinions and don't see things my way, they're wrong. Yeah, and when they're wrong, then I better correct them. And because my way is always right. And then, you know, you see what's going on based on that kind of way of thinking. But when we really analyze, you know, reality depends on our having consciousness. And so different beings in different realms are going to see things quite differently, not only because of the different senses they have, but just where we talk about karma and a way of seeing things, a way of experiencing things. So for example, what I see as filth and dirt, flies see as lunch and they think it's beautiful. Okay, both ideas are correct within their own purview. Okay, although they're very, very different. You know why? Because you have different beings perceiving them with their different senses and different ways of conceiving and designating them. Okay, so I just wanted to talk about why we think about time first, because that sets the stage really for what's important. Another prime thing in Buddhism is we talk a lot about karma, which is basically one way of talking about cause and effect. Yeah, so many different systems of cause and effect. Karma is one of them, and it's a moral system, you know, but it's also a psychological system that what we think, what we say, what we do, how we feel, all these things are impermanent phenomena that arose due to their causes. So they're results of previous causes. But then everything we're experiencing now becomes, and especially the decisions, the ethical decisions we make regarding things, these all become the causes for what we will experience in the future. Okay, so yeah, so time is just when things are happening, and it's you know, it encompasses the whole thing of cause and effect. Causes come before effects. Yeah, there's no such thing as an effect that comes before its causes. You know, that doesn't make any sense. We get all sorts of theories arising in today's society about parallel universes and going back in time and going forward in time. And Buddhism doesn't really concern itself with that so much. It's really, what are we doing with our time? What are we thinking about? How are we acting? Are we making our lives meaningful? so that when we die, we can look back and say, I feel good about what I did. Instead of, I spent my whole life just chasing pleasure, and in the process harmed a bunch of people and, whatever. Okay, so I think that's my introduction.
Thank you so much. This is now the fun part where you ask each other questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that everybody's converging on a relational view of time, that the challenge of time is that it, in some sense, doesn't exist. And what do we do about that?
No, it exists, but not as a concrete thing. It exists in relationship to other things. Yeah, it's the same thing with area. Area, a square mile isn't an objective thing. It's depending on, some, maybe your points instead of a triangle in some other shape, or, a bunch of land or whatever. Area doesn't exist apart from those things.
Yeah, I think I certainly agree with that. All I would say in defense of myself is that I've just found it extremely intriguing what is time, and have been trying to understand it from a scientific point of view. This does lead me to believe that there is an external world. I do think that you are there in California, all of you, and to some extent that you are real, and that so to that extent I believe in an external world. And I thought from what you were saying that was not exactly your viewpoint.
No, there's an external world, but it's not objective, such that everybody sees the same things and relates to the same things in the same way. It exists, the world exists in relation to our minds.
Yes, now if I can come in, I would certainly agree with you that everybody sees it from a different point of view. I'm looking at you and you're looking at me, and those are definitely not the same. On the other hand, I would say that what science is striving to do is to knit all those different pictures together. And to quote Leibniz, Leibniz talks about us living in the most varied of all possible universes, and he likens ourselves to what he calls monads. And he says the monads are like different views of the same city seen from different perspectives, so that the same city is multiplied in perspective. And I would say this is what, as a scientist, and I think many other scientists, physicists, are trying to do, is to get some comprehensive view like that, so to speak, of seeing the whole universe from different possible points of view. And I think that they could therefore knit together what you've just been saying about all those different points of view. So I would still strive very much for an objective universe, even although it's tantalizingly far away.
Because we go through a very rigorous thing of using analysis to actually refute the idea of some objective, inherently existent object.
Sorry, what was that one word you used?
Inherently existent.
Existent. Okay, yeah, fine.
No,
yeah.
no, inherently existent.
Yes, I got that. Yes.
Okay. From a Buddhist viewpoint, there's existence, and then there's inherent existence, and there's dependent existence. Yeah. What our problem as human beings stems because we think things inherently exist, meaning that they have their own independent nature that exists in them without depending on causes and conditions, without depending on parts, without depending on living beings conceiving and designating them. So that's the inherent independent existence that, from our philosophical view, we refute. What we establish is dependent existence, yeah, and that things depend on other things that are not them. Okay.
Can I just come in to say that in effect we might really agree, just that I can illustrate with my triangle, because it only exists in its entirety as a triangle. So the individual vertices really have no meaning. So really I would say that my notion of a triangle or an instant of time is a deeply holistic concept, and that none of the vertices have any meaning on their own. So I think that would agree with what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the example really well. Why a triangle? Why not 4 points? And
well, yes, it could be any number. I'm just taking the simplest possible. I mean, mathematicians always like to start with the simplest non-trivial examples. Einstein always said, when you've got some basic idea, try and first of all work out the implications of its simplest realization. And that's what I'm trying to say. Now, of course, you can have 4, 5, 6, you can have trillions of particles, but they will always form a shape. If they're particles in space, they will always form a shape. And I regard those shapes as being things that have, I would say, an inherent existence. In fact, I conceive of the sort of a universe of all possible shapes.
if those shapes had their own nature, then they would never change.
Well, this is eternity. I would say that the possible triangles in Euclidean space exist in an eternal mathematical realm. That's for me eternity. The possible shapes.
I think I'm lost.
Well, perhaps it's
I'm just enjoying.
Well, one other thing, would you say that the numbers, what is your feeling about the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Do they exist forever? Are they in what sense do they
They're
exist?
things created, numbers are things created by minds. We need a way to organize our world, our life. So we invented numbers, 1, 2, 3, but you take something that is 1, here's 1, now it's 2. So it can't be inherently 1, because then it could never change. We have 2. We actually have 3 because there's water in it, and I can dump the water out and create a mess.
No, you're
Then
making very good points there. I guess the difficulty is perhaps that mathematics, physics, philosophy, these are all different disciplines which have their different basic concepts. And all I will say for the scientific approach is that it is staggeringly successful. We wouldn't be able to talk to each other and smile at each other's points if it weren't for the successes of science. And to some extent, that's an impressive evidence that a great deal of what science and mathematics is saying has a good support.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. Yeah. You can't predict everything because you don't know the causes of everything. Yeah, but science can, put different things together and create possibilities. But what I'm interested in is, why are we so afraid of the future? Yeah, what is it in us that makes us afraid of the future and remorseful about the past? What is it about us that we collect photographs that talk of our whole life experiences? Why do we do that? Yeah, there's some need inside human beings that makes us look at things in a certain way or seek things out.
I think it's partly to do with us trying to understand the world, the universe in which we find ourselves, and to keep on saying, reassuring ourselves that it is the same. I mean, part of the reasons why, I mean, I'm lucky enough to have children and grandchildren, and I have pictures of them on my kitchen wall. But in some senses, this is part of me just saying, yes, I am in the same universe. It does make sense. It's, by the way, it's not much to do with me being afraid of death. I take that with quite a lot of, as Ernst Mach said, he's not looking forward to dying, but he's not afraid of death.
Mm. Yeah. I wanted to ask a question to both of you. I don't know if it makes sense to you, but it just struck me when I was reading things that both science and Christianity, or theistic religion, but principally the Judaic-Christian tradition, has a very similar outlook on what the basis is that we're talking about. You know, yes, there's an objective reality. There's a creator that manages things, or there's mathematical principles that manage things. I don't know. Do you think in the evolution of science, which occurred so much in the West, that it was based on, usually we think of science as opposed to Christianity, but do you think it somehow took parts of the Christian worldview and just took them in a different direction?
Absolutely.
Whereas if science had developed, let's say, in China, yeah, or in India, science might have developed in totally a different way because of the basic outlook of what people, you know, who people think, what we think we are and what we think our purpose is.
What would you say, John? I mean, I've got a view on that, but I think you wanted to come in, John.
Well, well, one thing I think is it's possible that China and India did develop science, but we can't recognize it as science, probably because it's not mathematical. I think the mathematizability was the core concept that Galileo came up with, and it's gone from there.
Mm-hmm. But isn't math something we made up?
Well, I think so, yeah. I think so.
By the way, interestingly, John, something that I discovered recently, what is the etymology of mathematics?
Thing learned.
Sorry? I beg your pardon?
What you learn. Mathematics.
Well, basically, yes. I mean, it's knowledge generally, isn't it? It's very general. It
can be more general. It just means
yes, mathema is knowledge. It's very general. It's not sort of the way we normally think about math. I was very surprised to learn this a few months ago when I looked up the etymology of mathematics.
It's the same. Music is in classical Greek is culture in general, which is
yeah. No, that's very interesting.
Philosophy is the highest form of music.
Yes, yes. No, there was something that from the Buddhist thing that was interesting. I'm afraid I've got slightly distracted from that, but thanks for coming in on that, John. What was the comment from? Sorry, I've forgotten your name. The Buddhist.
My name Chodron.
What were you just saying at the end? The last thing you were saying.
Oh, the last thing was when I said, isn't mathematics something that we created?
I think so.
No, oh yes, no, now I remember the point. You were saying, could science have developed in a different way? Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think, I mean, this, even within the Western tradition, there's a tremendous amount which is contingent that certain discoveries were made. I mean, one of my big topics is Einstein's great theory of general relativity and the way he discovered it, which was definitely contingent. He happened to do one thing before another, and that then had a huge influence on what he did then later. So a great deal in science is contingent. It certainly started off with people like Newton being a firm believer in God, and a lot of the early scientists were looking at were doing science to try and work out what God's design was in the universe, that's for sure. That slowly faded away, but there's still quite a lot of working scientists who would still share that view, I think, even today.
But we do have questions on the Q&A. Actually, there's one for John, one for Julian, and one for Chodron. I don't know if Maria, you want to take care of this?
Yes, absolutely. And we can take the questions in the order in which they came. And as additional questions percolate, please feel free, audience members, to put them in the Q&A section of the webinar, and we'll get to as many as we can. So John, a question for you came in, intrigued by your characterization of time specifically as mystery, and wanted to connect this to some Heidegger. And the person, Joel, the person posing the question, which I think is wonderful that you got the first question, considering how you are opening up with the idea of questions and quest as interruptions of time and flow. So here we go.
Yeah.
Later, Heidegger discusses the importance of mystery, but generally the way people characterize Heidegger's view of time from his earlier work is in terms of finitude. And so this question is asking you to talk a little more about the early Heidegger, and to what extent you think that he was talking about time, not just as finitude, but also the earlier work getting into this notion of mystery that you closed with at the end of your remarks.
Well, in terms of the early Heidegger, time is, he sees it as, I mean, he's doing something he calls phenomenology. That means he's looking at our experience. So he's looking at that level of time, not what is time in the universe independently of our minds, but what is it for us? And the first point is it's limited. We don't have infinite time, right? We've got a few years on this earth, and that requires us to pick and choose what we're going to do. So it is the fact of our mortality that gives our lives shape. If we don't think we're going to die, you don't make any choices, right? I'll go practice law in Tennessee for a couple of 100 years, and when I get tired of that, I'll go do kickboxing in Marseille, and when I get tired of that, I don't know, I'll go wine in Argentina. You know, there's no way to commit yourself to anything. So the fact that our time is finite is extremely important. It structures our lives. The end of our life is what does that, and that's death, and that's a mystery. So we are underway at a speed of 60 seconds a minute to an ultimate mystery, after which we have no knowledge of what's going to be there, if anything. So finitude and mystery go together for Heidegger when he comes to talk about time. And it's all about how we are inserted into time, how we are positioned within time.
Very good. Thank you. And the next question from our attendees, Julian, is for you. If you could comment on time in the context of relational quantum mechanics.
Not really, because I don't think relation, well, I do, I wonder how knowledgeable the question is. There are at least two different ways, at least that I know of, people who talk about relational quantum mechanics. One is Carlo Rovelli, who has certain ideas with which I don't agree really. There are other people who are trying to understand time in the context of quantum mechanics. And the more I think about it, I just think it doesn't really stack up. I'll bring in entanglement and Schrödinger's famous cat. So there is this extraordinary confirmed property that comes out of quantum, I mean, fact of nature that comes out of quantum mechanics, that things that are very far apart and between which you can't send signals in by light in sort of, I mean, it takes a finite time for that a signal to be sent. Nevertheless, something can happen, shall we say, in Africa, and that will affect instantly what will be observed in the United States. You can't use it to send a message, but nevertheless, it establishes correlations, and that's very mysterious. Now, people have argued that this could also tell you what time is in some senses, that somewhere there would be one thing which would be a clock ticking away that is entangled with the rest of the universe, which would be telling it what the time is. Now, I've spent quite a bit of time recently actually studying this idea, and in the end, I'm really very skeptical about the idea, because it's really that clock outside the universe. This is what's called the Page-Wouters idea, entanglement time. This thing that is meant to serve as a clock, it can't be in any way coupled to the universe and interacting with it, otherwise it won't tell a good time. And so I think this division of the universe into a clock which is separately telling the time and the rest of the universe just doesn't really work. I mean, if you have a universe consisting of a finite number of particles and you try and take the 4 of them apart and say these 4 are going to be what's telling me the time for the rest of the universe. In fact, you can't do that because they're all coupled together and the whole lot are evolving together. And it's the whole universe as a whole which is telling its own time as it evolves, very much along the lines of what I said in my presentation at the start. So I'm rather skeptical about that.
Thank you. Venerable Chodron, a question for you. If you could comment on the timeless Rigpa, the so-called 4th time, a timeless time.
The 4th time of timeless time?
It's it's in the Q&A, the timeless, then there's quotations around it, Rigpa,
Mm-hmm.
the so-called 4th time, a timeless time.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Okay.
Rigpa is a very subtle kind of consciousness, you know,
Mhm.
that you're trying to call up to realize the lack of inherent existence of things. But I'm sorry, I don't really understand the question.
We have another question for Chodron,
Okay.
so maybe we can try this one.
We do, yes. How the idea of time fits in with Buddhist teachings on future and past lives. There are actually 2 questions for you. That's one. And then the next one is, you mentioned about how scientific exploration and discovery would perhaps be very different in a different non-Western context. And this question is asking you to speculate on what you think that might have looked like in an alternative context. So one question about time in the context of future and past lives, and then thoughts on what alternative forms of science may have been centered or prioritized.
Yeah, people are asking quite good questions.
Yes, a good question, but not for me. I don't think I should talk about Buddhism in present company, since I know about as much about that as I do about physics. What was the other question? The other question was.
Yes,
Questions
these
for
are
Chodron.
for children.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought they were for me. All right.
Right. So yeah, so John, you're off the hook on the Buddhism questions for now. For now.
Yeah. So time in terms of past and future lives, like I said, in Buddhism, everything is wide open. There's infinite space, there's infinite time. there's, what limits us so much is how we conceive something and try and put it in a box and concretize it. That's what our problem is. But things themselves, they're, the question came up about, forget where it was, but, we talk about cause and effect. And so, sorry, I'm trying to think of which direction to go to answer this question. Okay, so if we want to talk about past and future lives, we start out with the fact that there's consciousness. We are aware, we can relate to the world, we can cognize the world, but there's also not just our five senses, but there's a mental cognition also. And there's thinking, and thinking is done by the mental consciousness, not the sense consciousnesses. So we talk about the consciousness as being a dependently arising phenomena. One moment arises, one moment of mind comes from the previous moment of mind, which comes from the previous moment of mind. And so when we talk about just the fact of consciousness being something that is clear in that it can reflect objects, and cognizant in that it can engage with objects, then one moment of clarity and cognizance arises due to its principal cause, the previous moment, which arises due to its cause, the previous moment, ad infinitum in the past. Same thing with going in the future. The consciousness produces one moment, produces the next moment, produces the next moment. These moments form a continuum, okay, of cause and effect of similar type. Yeah, but the moments each, we talk about the present moment. It's very difficult to isolate the present moment, because if you say this is the present moment, well, that moment that you just designated has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so which part of the present moment is the present? Is it the beginning part, the middle part, the end? Whatever you choose, it too is going to have a beginning, middle, and end. So it becomes very difficult to actually pinpoint what the present is, okay? Because something is arising and in the process of disintegrating in every nanosecond, and we can't even measure a finite nanosecond and say this is the smallest division of time, in the same way that we can't say with matter this is the smallest particle, or this is the, like that, because everything is dependent on other things that comprise it, either in a causal sequence, we have a continuum, or in something that exists right now, all of its different parts. So yes, our consciousness existed in the past, it exists in the future. Is it the same consciousness? The consciousness itself is changing moment by moment, but there's the same continuity of consciousness, such that what we think about or experience in the past is going to influence what we experience and how we act in the future. And the past and future they're not the same moment, but they exist in a cause and effect sequence. So I'm not sure if that's getting at what the person was asking about. How that really relates in our lives is because we're talking about this cause and effect sequence that is very much based on what we're thinking and saying and doing, okay, then it's important to pay attention to those kinds of things and not just have an attitude of, well, anything goes, I can do whatever I want because there's no, whatever I want is just going to kind of die somewhere. It's not going to have a result. And, I think Buddhism is very much in agreement with science about, cause and effect being so important, which intrigued me about what you were talking about Heidegger, that, time, yes, is finite about our life. So it's important to think about what we're doing with our time, but time is also infinite. So does he think that, when we die, that somehow our consciousness just ceases? And is that possible for something that, is clear and cognizant? What would make it cease? It might transform and bring, different kinds of consciousnesses depending on your next rebirth. But is he just saying that, that there's no time when you die, after you die? In which case, that brings up a whole ton of questions for me.
No, he's not saying that. He's totally agnostic. That's the point. It's a mystery. We may continue, we may not. And so, but his not going there is not just being prudent. He's it's essential to his next move, which is to say we are bound to mystery. We don't know.
Can I come in, Pablo?
Yes.
I would like to raise some question about Chodron's emphasis on cause and effect. I'm a bit skeptical about that. Leibniz was very concerned with this idea that that every effect has a cause, because that leads to an infinite regress. He said we can never understand why the present state, because we always have to say, well, it's the cause of something that went before. Now, I think there's a real challenge to this, and one of them comes from cosmology, the notion of the Big Bang. There is, after all, pretty strong evidence from cosmology that the universe did begin.
Wait a minute, you think that there was nothing before the Big Bang?
Hang on a minute, let me go on a little bit further. Now, intriguingly, I started off by talking about my model universe, the just consisting of triangles, or rather shapes of triangles. Now, there's an interesting fact that, well, first of all, let me also add that the evidence from cosmology is that the universe began in an extraordinarily uniform shape, and has since then has been getting ever more varied and structured. And that is why we can talk to each other and see each other as we do now. Now, interestingly, in my three-particle model, where I just talked about three particles, if I were to ask you, think of just one special triangle, I think you would probably come up with the one that certainly a mathematician would be. It is the equilateral triangle, the one that is most uniform in that all of its sides are equal. And these ideas that I've been developing with my collaborators, which we call shape dynamics, actually just with point particles leads to a rather interesting theory in which the universe does have a beginning, which is in its most uniform shape that it possibly can have. And if it's a universe of just three particles, it's just the equilateral triangle. And then it just gets more and more shapes. Now, with a triangle, it just is pretty dull, because it just becomes like a wedge where there's one side is much shorter than the other two, and it gets more and more like a needle. But if you have a great number of particles, the structure can get very much richer. So the picture of the universe that my collaborators and I are developing at the moment is one that does actually match the universe as described in cosmology in accordance with Einstein's general theory of relativity. And it's one that has a genuine beginning. The beginning is one of the greatest uniformity that is possible. And then, as it were, structure grows and gets more interesting. And there's an interesting bit of etymology here. What is the etymology of creation? Now, it's nothing whatever to do with creatio ex nihilo. It comes from an Indo-Germanic word meaning to grow. So I find this actually a very attractive picture of the universe where, so to speak, it emerges from the most structureless uniformity that you can imagine, which is like a field of soil, and then structures, plants, seeds germinate, structures get bigger and bigger. And that's the view that I have of the universe. And it's really rather different from cause and effect. And even very intriguingly, from that very uniform start, you can't tell what the future will be. And in some real sense, it's not the case that the past determines the future, the present, but that the present determines the past. It tells you how what you are has emerged out of that very uniform past. So this is a very different view from both standard cosmology as it is now understood, but it's not so far removed. But it's also, I would say, very far from this insistence on cause and effect, which of course people like David Hume are pretty skeptical about cause and effect.
And I'd like to jump in here, Julian. This is fascinating, and it ties into another question that was in our Q&A that I think would apply to all three of our panelists here today. And it was a question specifically on whether time has a beginning, right? Which you, Julian, have just talked about a little bit. And the question the questioner is specifically saying, does time have a beginning? Did it begin with the Big Bang, like Julian, like you were talking about? And so I'd like to open this up to all three of our panelists in terms of if we can conceptualize time as having a beginning, and what would even be at stake in doing so from your perspective and your discipline, and the assumptions behind positing a beginning or a genealogy of time.
So do you want me to go first, or what about the others two going first? No interest.
You go, Julian, you go, you start.
Okay, yes, no, I'm getting more and more, I mean, I would, because it's, to quite an extent, it's my idea, but my collaborators were very important in too. I find it very attractive. I think the evidence for the Big Bang is quite impressive. I mean, it's not rock solid, but it nevertheless has withstood the test of time. Certain predictions were made, and then they were later confirmed. But I personally find it very attractive, the idea that this idea that what we are now has come about from growth out of uniformity, so that there is, so to speak, a complete explanation of what we are now. The theory that I'm developing with my collaborators does suggest that there is a complete explanation of why I'm talking to you now. Not that we could spell it out in precise details, but it is, so to speak, out there in the realm of possibilities.
The time have a beginning. If you start from where we are and ask, how can we reason our way to one or the other of these alternatives, I think Kant set this up as an antinomy with equal, if you say time had a beginning, then you are led to ask, out of what? And you're led to the view that there must have been something prior to the beginning of time, in which case time had no beginning. That was not.
Well, I would say I'm very much a Platonist with regard to mathematics. I do believe in Platonic ideas in mathematics, that really, in some senses, a mathematician can think about equilateral triangles, they can think about regular tetrahedra and things like that. Those are the things that I would say are real. The great French mathematician Henri Poincaré said that the word existence in mathematics has a different significance from what people normally think. In mathematics, it's something which is not got a contradiction in it. It's something that is consistent. And I would say that this theory that my collaborators and I are developing, that the universe you can say that the beginning of the universe is when it is in its most uniform shape that it can possibly be, and then that structure develops out of that. That is mathematically possible, and that is, so to speak, all existing in a mathematical realm. And a rather nice aspect of this is that, so to speak, when you express this in physics terms, what you and I look like now, we are structures, and you can say literally the universe has done work. A certain amount of work has been done by the universe to transform uniformity into you, John, and you, Chodron, and you, Pablo, looking as we do, just like we as human beings can make things with tools and so forth. We can structure them. I would say the universe has created us as we look now, as we are.
So in that uniformity, was there time?
No, I would say there's what I said right at the start. I believe there are instants of time, but not an invisible flowing time. Time for me is just a measure of the difference, in the simplest possible way I can illustrate it, between those two triangles. They are incongruent. So I can't bring one to lie exactly on the other.
So you can't have time without structure. Therefore, time.
Absolutely, you can't have time. This is very Leibnizian.
In the uniformity.
Yeah, this is very Leibnizian.
Mm-hmm. How come the universe wasn't created 10 minutes earlier?
That's a meaningless question.
Uh-huh.
To the extent that you can say the universe has a beginning, its beginning is, in the simplest case, it's an equilateral triangle. It can be much more complicated than that, but in all cases, it just is. By the way, there's one of my most favorite things is in Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, where the unfortunate Malvolio is being teased by Festi the clown, and he says, as the old hermit of Prague very wisely said to King Gorboduc, that is. So I think there's a lot to be said for the verb to be. And interestingly, there isn't really a verb to be in the Russian language. They say they have to use the word to appear.
Oh.
Является is to appear. So I find that a particularly interesting thing. So I just, I mean, I think it's complete. I think, anyway, didn't St. Augustine deal with that problem of why didn't the world begin 10 minutes earlier? He said the world did not begin in time. It was not created in time. It was created with time.
Created, huh? It grew.
With time, yeah. But I would say in the Platonic realm that the possible shapes of the universe just exist in a mathematical realm.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a question here. Why does there have to be a beginning to time? And especially in math, you go the negative numbers, you go to the positive numbers, both are at infinite. You never reach a beginning of the negative numbers, the end of the positive numbers. Why does there have to be a beginning to time? That's our mind, our conception saying there has to be a beginning. I'm asking why.
I'm not saying that there must be a beginning, but I'm saying there can be a beginning. By the way, I think the existence of the negative numbers is on much shakier ground than the existence of the positive integers. It was a very, very long time before mathematicians were prepared to accept the notion of negative numbers. I mean, that I have two hands is pretty clear. Whether to say I have minus two hands is a lot less clear, I think.
And in terms of time, we are coming to the end of our time for this event. And I just wanted to bring up again, kind of as a summative comment, something John mentioned at the beginning of the discussion, which is kind of the coalescence around relation and relationality. and of objects, of moments, of particles, of personal past, and of our becoming or bringing into being in terms of relations as opposed to independently existing entities. And I think this is really fascinating too, how even past, present, and future, as you all have been discussing it, themselves are relational, right, and not discrete entities, and require reconfigurings and reconstitutings as they are brought into being together. So I thank you all for this generative discussion and sharing your thoughts and your inquiries in our discussion on time, and for providing us with an array of wonderful threads that we can carry through as we continue our thinking and our programming on this theme. So thank you again to the people attending and our audience for your attention and your questions and your interest in this topic. Very special thanks to all of our panelists for participating today and sharing your valuable time with us, and also Pablo for organizing this event and for moderating. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all. It
Thanks.
was exactly as I thought it would be. I appreciate you all.
Yes, and it was fun to meet my fellow panelists.
Yes, I agree, definitely.
We should commit to do this in person next year.
We have time.
If we have time.
Yes, by the way, our just to be reassuring, our theory is that time has a beginning but no end.
I was gonna ask you about that. Isn't heat death uniformity?
No, by the way, let me do a plug for my most recent book, The Janus Point, where I'm arguing that idea that the universe will end in a heat death is wrong. I've got quite a strong argument in it all goes back. Let me just say why. Because how did thermodynamics and all the idea of heat death arise? It came from that wonderful book published in 1824 by the Frenchman Sadi Carnot on the way to make steam engines maximally efficient. Now, a steam engine stops working if the steam escapes from the cylinder. So that the whole of thermodynamics and statistical mechanics assumed an agent in a box, the working agent in a box. And in that case, you certainly will have heat death. But is the universe in a box? If the universe is not in a box, the story looks to me to be completely different. And in fact, I strongly suspect that's why I'm able to talk to you in this panel discussion, John. So let me make a plug for my book, The Janus Point, published at the end of 2020.